Okay, domain and range. If you're not quite sure what these words mean and you're studying the topic of functions, then the purpose of this video is to get you to understand the domain and range a little bit better. They're not too difficult to understand in their general sense, but these words here, domain and range, are really important in your study of something called functions. Okay, so if you're in algebra, you're probably studying. If you're interested in this topic, you're studying the concept of functions, and functions go along with even a bigger subtopic, or functions are a subtopic of a bigger topic called relations. Okay, so I'm not going to get into that in this video because this is a whole study in and of itself. But if you're interested about domain and range, then of course you're studying these topics here. Okay, so let's get right to it. So let's just write a function down. Okay, so a function could look something like this: f of x equals x squared plus 2. Okay, so a function is basically just a rule. All right, now when we look at this function here, okay, the x is going to be our input. All right, we have input values. So I can find, for example, f of 2 for this particular function. That means I'm going to input 2 everywhere I see an x. So in this particular function, it would be 2 squared plus 2. Okay, so I saw wherever an x is, I'm going to replace it with what my input value is. In this case, it's 2. So I'm kind of assuming that you have a basic understanding of functions. Again, if you don't, I have plenty of other videos on my channel. You might want to take a look at that. Some of those other videos on functions and relations kind of bolster up your understanding there, and then we can really study domain and range better. But let's assume that you have a good idea of what I'm talking about right now. Now let's take a look at this function, okay, a little bit differently, right? And this is a lot of teachers like to use this model. It's kind of a really good model of explaining domain and range. All right, let's kind of do it this way. And let's think of like a machine, okay? And a particular machine where we input numbers into this machine, okay? And then we're going to get output values, all right? So this particular function, okay, the rule is, hey, whatever numbers we plug in, what we're going to do is we're going to square whatever values and add 2 to them, and that's going to be our output value. So if I input a 2, let's just imagine there's a 2 here, we just kind of feed it to this machine, we throw it in, the machine is going to take that 2, we're going to square it and then add 2. Okay, so in this case, we're doing the same thing as what I'm doing over here, right? I'm going to end up with 2 squared, which is 4 plus 2, or 6. So in this particular machine, if I throw in the 2 into this particular little function machine, if you will, I'm going to end up with a 6. All right. So right now we can already define domain and range. All right? Domain is simply our input values. Now there's a little bit more to it in a second, but let's just keep it really simple, okay? The domain are the values that are our input values into a function. The output values are the range. That's all the domain and range are. But again, there's more to it than that. You know, we can go deeper into it, and I'm going to do that right now. So technically, the domain, okay, you can think of it as the input values that we put into a function, is the set of all input values. So the domain is all numbers, okay, or all values that we can input into our machine. Let's just say that. Okay, I'm kind of not using technical mathematical language here, but I want to give you an idea of how to understand this, okay? So the domain is a set of all values that we can input to our machine. You're like, well, what does that mean? Well, there are some values, okay, there could be values that we don't want to stick into our machine. It will kind of break the machine. Kind of, it's like you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what am I talking about? Okay. In this particular example, it's hard to see, so I'm going to give you another function machine example. Let's say I have this function machine. Okay, the square root of x. Okay, so that would be this function, f of x is equal to the square root of x. Okay, so but we're looking at it as a machine here for a second, right? So we're going to input values, which is our domain, and then we're going to have output values, which is our range, right? So this is the range, and this is the domain. So the domain is our input values, but the input values that we can plug in without breaking the machine. So this particular example, okay, let's do a couple examples let's do an example of an input value that's okay. So let's say I plugged in a 16 into this machine. So what that would do is says, okay, take your input value and take the square root of it. So the square root of 16, that output value would be 4. Technically speaking, it's plus 4 and minus 4. Okay, no problems, right? So I was able to input this value into this machine, and it produced a nice output value. So 16 would be kind of allowed in my domain. So think of the domain almost as like a team. And say, okay, 16, you didn't break the machine, so you can join up the domain. Now, how about we do something else? How about -9? All right. So if you have your calculator handy, go ahead and try to take the square root of -9. All right. Go ahead and put -9. Try to take the square root of it. If you have your calculator there, you're going to find out your calculator is going to say error. Okay. Your calculator is not going to understand that. If you're using a really sophisticated graphing calculator and you know what you're doing, it would give you a particular answer. But most basic calculators you're going to tell you, I don't understand this, because the square root of -9 is you can't calculate that in the real number system. Okay. So again, I'm focusing my conversation here with you for those students that are probably taking like Algebra 1. Just if you don't really know what the domain and range are, then you're probably at that more Algebra 1 level, which means that you're working with real numbers. So in other words, you don't know, or your calculator doesn't know what the square root of -9 is. That's actually what we call a complex number. But if we plug it into this machine, because you get an error, -9 effectively like breaks the machine. It's not going to work in the machine. The output value is going to be like a question mark. Like, I don't know how to calculate that. Okay. So this is really important. So -9 would not be a part of the domain. Okay. Because it's a value that will not run in our machine. So the only values that are going to run in this particular machine are basically positive numbers. Anything that's not negative. Okay, 0 is okay, because if I ask you to take the square root of 0, that's just 0. All right, so when we talk about domain and range, we have to kind of put limitations and rules on them. So in this particular, let me kind of erase some of this stuff here because we're getting kind of busy with some things. But in this particular example, the domain we would kind of describe as all numbers that are positive or 0. Okay. Now there's a fancier way to describe that in mathematics. That's all positive real numbers, and x is greater than or equal to 0, etc. I'm not really focusing on that. I could do other videos on this. I'm just trying to get you to understand the essence of what domain and range are. Okay, so the domain in this particular example would be all numbers that are not going to break the machine. Okay, in this case, it's just all positive numbers. Okay, like the square root of 16. That's okay. Okay, you can actually put any positive number into your calculator. Like, try to find out what the square root of 7 is. That's going to be a decimal, but it's going to work, right? You're going to be able to use your calculator and do that. Now, So this is an example of what the domain is, okay? There are other conditions as well, which I'm not going to get into in this video. I just want you to understand what the domain is. Now, being that we could plug in all numbers that are positive or zero into this particular machine, the range, okay, is going to be basically all not just, you're not going to, the domain, I'm sorry, the range is going to be, we're going to have to figure that out separately from the domain. And figuring out the range is more challenging. It is more challenging than figuring out the domain. The range can oftentimes require you to look at a graph and, but anyways, let's think about it for a second. Just because I can only put positive values into this machine doesn't mean that my range is just all positive values. I can get negative values as well. Like, so for example, the square root of 16 is both plus and minus 4. So the range is going to be all values on the real number line, okay? In other words, all positive values, negative values, and 0. So just because the domain is one thing doesn't mean that the range is going to be the same thing, okay? So again, determining the domain generally requires some algebraic skills. It's not too difficult, but the range a little bit more challenging. I'm going to do, or I probably already have on my channel, I have a lot of videos on there, so I encourage you to subscribe. But this gets, we can get more and more and more like deeper into this topic of domain and range, functions and relations. It's a huge topic in mathematics, but let's just kind of keep it at bay with just the things that we just talked about here, because this is really an introductory video. Okay, so domain and range are what? Well, the domain are all the values that you can plug into a function, okay, that don't break the function, that don't have restrictions on them. Okay, so that's the domain. It's a set of all the numbers that you're allowed to plug into a function. Okay. The range is all the respective output values based upon the input values. So whatever input value you can plug in, okay, the respective output values that you get are the range. Okay. Now, just to wrap this up, let's take a look at our first example, this x squared plus 2. Okay. So can you think of any values that we can't plug in this particular function? Well, in fact, there is no restrictions in this particular function here. Okay, you can plug in anything you want, and so the domain would be all real numbers, and your range would also be all real numbers. Okay, but let's kind of take a look at this function here, and let's change it up for a second. What if I plugged in x squared plus 2 over x? Let's say that was our function rule. Okay. So now I want you to think about the domain. Are there any numbers that we could throw into this machine that could end up breaking the machine or hurting the machine? Okay. There's one value. All right. Hopefully you know what that is. There's one value that we can't throw into this machine. If we throw it into the machine, it's going to make it blow up. You know what that is? It's 0. Okay. So when x is equal to 0, we get a 0 down here in the denominator. We would get 0 squared, which is okay, plus 2, because 0 squared is just 0, but we cannot ever have 0 in the denominator. So any values that cause the denominator become 0 is not allowed in the domain. Okay, so this is also, if you go into your calculator and take 7 and divide it by 0, you're going to get an error. Okay, so again, just like we had the square root of -9 over here, there are values that we can't calculate in terms of the real number system, and that's what we're working on. Okay. Again, as you get more advanced in mathematics, then we start talking about complex imaginary numbers, etc. But if you just remember these main concepts that I'm telling you here, you'll have a good firm understanding on domain and range. All right, so let's go and wrap this up. Again, I hope that you will subscribe to my channel. I do a ton of videos on mathematics. Try to basically explain things in ways that are smaller chunks where things are much easier to understand than, a large, broader concept. But when you do subscribe, by the way, if you do choose to subscribe, make sure to hit that bell button. That's how you'll get notifications on my videos. I'm doing videos constantly. And of course, if you appreciated the video and you liked it, maybe give it a thumbs up and leave me some feedback. I try to read as many comments as possible just to see what questions you may have out there. Um, Again, on the concept of domain and range, it's part of a larger concept of functions and relations, and there's a lot to learn in there. I have quite a bit of videos already on my channel, and I'm going to obviously be doing more and more. So leave me some comments if you have any particular questions. I'll try to make a video to answer those. But again, thanks for your time, and have a great day.